Good afternoon, and thank you so much for taking time to listen to the Beekeeping for Newbees podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm going to be your host throughout your beekeeping journey. We've made a lot of changes recently. We've been moving our podcast host from one to another. The good news to that is you don't have any advertising right now, but I wanted to ask a favor from all of you. We are trying to grow our presence to be able to provide more and better and dynamic content. We've got a lot of videos we've done. We're trying to do a lot more. If you would, please go over to YouTube and check us out. We are at Beekeeping for Newbees. That's Newbees on YouTube. Please check out our videos there and consider subscribing to the channel and let us know what you need. Let us know how we can help support you along your journey. And with that, thank you so much again for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen. I do appreciate you. And as always, feel free to reach out, Jeff, at beekeepingfornewbies.com. That's Newbees.com. Today is going to be episode 68, and we are talking specifically, this is a episode by request. This is one of the many benefits of being an exclusive content member. You get to request what you want to see and what you want to hear. Now, I take requests from everybody. You don't have to be an exclusive content listener to get that. But if you are an exclusive content subscriber, you're getting everything recorded at a higher bit rate. You're getting it all commercial free, and it helps to support the hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of equipment that I've bought in order to produce this. But if nothing else, I hope you enjoy yourself and have a good time listening to what we put out here. So today, this is for DJ in our Discord room. He was bugging me. I say that affectionately and jokingly. He was harassing me in the Discord room a couple months ago about an episode on splits. And I said, hey, man, this is like October. Why are we talking about splits right now? And he's like, I want to get ready for next year. So what he specifically asked for is to talk about splits, for selling. So if you do a split and you make a nuke out of it and you want to sell that, but also for building up the apiary. So we're going to go today and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. So some of it's going to be some terminology that you may have never heard if you're still pretty new. That's where I would say go back and listen to, probably episodes like 1 through 15 or 20. Somewhere in there should give you a pretty good foundation. You can always go to the Beekeeping for Newbees. It's Newbees.com. You can go to the homepage there. There's a link to our Discord room. This is a slower time of year. It's just a seasonal kind of thing in the Northern Hemisphere. Not as many beekeepers are active. This is where I expect my Australian brothers and sisters to really step up there and start participating. But it does slow down a bit in the Discord room at this time of year. But I've got the app on my laptop. It's on my phone. If you just @message me, and I'm just Jeff S on there. So just @message me, and I'll get a notification. And as soon as I can respond, I will. But join us over there, and you can always ask questions. And it's usually a pretty active place. But we are going to talk about some terminology, and most of it, I'm going to try and go down to the very beginning on a few things, but I just can't go back on everything. So what is a split? Let's talk about that. So you have a colony up and running. Things are going great. Now, real quick sidebar. There are times of year where it's good and okay to split, and there are times of year when it is bad to split. I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we start going through this here. So a split is really defined as taking resources from a colony or one or more colonies to create another colony. This has a lot of benefits to it. So one of the benefits is it can help reduce the tendency to swarm. In the spring, you have a massive amount of bees that are being born. New bees are coming into the colony. The colony and the queen, everybody recognizes, hey, there's a lot of resources out there and we need to get as much as we can. And they will be rearing brood and raising new young workers at a rate that is just as fast as they can possibly do it. The more bees they have available, the more who can be out foraging, the more resources they can bring back, and the greater the likelihood is that that colony will survive. Now, one of the challenges with that is a bee colony can only fit within a certain amount of space. So the bees' natural process by which that they reproduce is they recognize they're running out of space and they say, you know what, we're going to have to do what we hear as a swarm. Now, a swarm is typically, it has a very negative connotation to it. To me, swarming is really super cool. In fact, I just did a video on YouTube. If you check out the channel, it's just, at Beekeeping for Newbees. But if you check out the channel, I did a swarm trap video yesterday where I put together some hardware, built a swarm trap. I'm going to probably hang about 20 of these things out there this year. I'm going to try and catch a whole bunch of swarms if I can. But to me, swarming is a great thing as long as it's happening to somebody else and they're coming towards my swarm trap. I don't want my colony to swarm. So what it is they've recognized they're running out of space. They're going to make a new queen. That new queen is going to stay behind with the colony while your existing productive, happy queen is going to leave with about half of the workers, and they're going to go to establish a new colony somewhere else. What this effectively means for you as the beekeeper of that hive is that your productivity is pretty well shot. You're going to have a break in time where no new honeybees are going to be born because you have a queen that's just emerged. And what has to happen is, so half the colony leaves, the other half is left behind. A new queen emerges. She has to kind of basically reach sexual maturity just by being alive. She doesn't really have to do anything special, but it does take a few days before she is physically ready to be mated. So she's hanging out in the colony. She's looking around, looking for other queen cells that she needs to eliminate. And somewhere between 3 to 7 days, she says, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to go on my mating flight. Sometimes she can go out one time. Sometimes she'll go out and come back and make multiple trips. But she's going to mate with somewhere, depending on whose numbers you look at, somewhere between 8 and 10 and maybe as many as 30 different drones during her mating flight. And then she will return and she will never leave the colony again unless it were, if she were to leave with a swarm in the future or something like that, that's fine. But she will never leave the colony again. She has no need to. And then she takes over operations. So in that process, you can lose at least a week, sometime as much as 10 days before she even starts laying that first egg after she has emerged from her queen cell. So you're 10 days in at this point, and then she lays that first egg, and then she's laying, of course, worker brood, worker eggs. Now you're 21 days from that first worker being born. So you've got a solid month, basically, where you're not getting any new bees since the swarm took place. And remember, swarming is a process that is typically taking place when there are way too many bees not coming in, but way too many bees inside the hive for the amount of space that's available. This happens in the spring. This happens at a time when pollen flows are at their max and everything is it's perfect harmony. Anybody who's been a beekeeper, particularly if you've paid attention in our Discord room, it is pure euphoria from April, May timeframe. Everybody's so excited. You can't really do anything wrong almost. As long as you can prevent them from swarming, everything else in your world's amazing. You go outside, you have your cup of coffee in the morning with your bees, you're happy, you're sharing stories and pictures and videos, selfies with the beehive, everything is great. But then you get to this kind of scenario where you have a 30-day gap at the most important time of year. The bees start prepping for the winter in my area. They start prepping in March, April. They are gathering resources today, today being March, April, not today being November. But they gather those resources immediately in the spring that they are packing away for long-term storage and use the following or the upcoming winter. So to have a 30-day break where you don't have any more bees being born to replace aging bees, that's very problematic. So one thing that splitting does is it helps to reduce the amount of bees within that colony, within that space, and helps to reduce that tendency or that desire to swarm. Now, there's other things we can do too, and we'll go into that. We'll talk about that in the spring as we start ramping up new colonies for all of the listeners and everybody who's a part of the Beekeeping for Newbies family and team. But, the short thing kind of to take away here is splitting is one way of helping to prevent or manage swarm behavior. Now, you can do splits in different ways. You can have, let's say you have 5 colonies, and you really want to grow and develop those colonies out. You don't want to give up too many resources, but you do want to grow the apiary a little bit. This is where you can say, I've got these 5 colonies. I'm going to take one frame from each colony, put that into a nucleus colony, which a nucleus colony kind of has a loose definition. It can be a small colony anywhere between 2 and I've seen as many as 8 frames. I think once you go above 5 frames, you're just in a small hive at that point. But everybody can make their own opinion as to how they define a nuke. But it's just a smaller, if you think of the word nucleus, right? It's a nucleus, a small element, like the nucleus being like the center of an atom. It's the same kind of thing. Like a nucleus is just a smaller portion of a hive. And it's going to be comprised of, frames of brood, a little bit of honey, and you at least have to have a queen cell. But ideally, if you have a mated queen, that's even better. You can do that. That would be an example of like a 1-to-many split. I have gotten resources from many hives to create one hive. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a many to one. I've taken resources from several hives to create one. I can do a 1-to-many. I can say, look, I don't care about honey production. I don't care about making, this hive ready to overwinter at the end of the year. I want this hive to make me 4 new colonies. Now, I had a colony like that. And what I did with them is they would explode in the spring, but they were really aggressive, super productive on honey. They made so much honey. But what I would do is once I decided to get rid of them, I did a 5-for-1 split. I broke the entire colony down and I made 5 nucleus colonies out of it. And then I re-queened all of them with mated queen from a much more gentle genetic makeup. And I just eliminated that colony's original queen altogether. So that would be like a 1-to-many. Some people will do 1-to-1. They say, I'm going to go buy a mated queen from a reputable supplier, which is one way of doing it. And but you can also, I'm going to go on a tangent here, and I just don't want to lose track here. So right now, let me make a note here right in front of me that says this is where I am, so I don't lose my place. Okay, because I don't want to get off in too far of a tangent, but this is kind of important. So I prefer to have a mated queen. If I'm going to do a split, I will take, let's just say, for example, I have a colony that's made of 2 deeps. I will go ahead and just move a space a few feet away, doesn't matter, a foot, whatever. And I will put a new hive setup over there, and I divide things up about 60% going towards the new hive and 40% for the old one. And the primary reason for making it slightly biased towards the new colony is because any foragers that are in that hive, especially when you're putting them next to each other or within the same bee yard, they're going to leave, they're going to fly out to go forage, and they're going to return back to the original hive. It's just the way they're hardwired. So hopefully, by doing like a 60-40, it kind of gives a better balance. If you do 50-50, it's going to be completely fine. Don't worry about it. It's just a ballpark. What I like to do with that is move them over, have that colony be queenless for, like about a day. And if you go too long, and if they have open brood in there, they will try to start making queen cells and raising their own queens. So you don't want to wait too long. But I give them about a day to be alone, and you can go ahead and introduce a laying queen directly. If she's a laying queen, which is a whole separate subject, if you're taking a queen from a hive where she has been actively laying, like an existing nucleus colony, you can bring her into that colony that is queenless. Like I said, give them a period of time to where they know they're 100% sure that they're queenless. And you can introduce her, usually direct introduction, and that's fine. If she's been caged up for, a half a day or more, go ahead and just use a queen cage and introduce her through that method, which we'll talk about on a different day. I'm not going to go into queen introductions necessarily today, but you introduce her through a cage, whatever method you want to do. A lot of people like to use virgin queens. Like, well, they're really cheap. You can get a virgin queen for about $5. What I don't like about this is you're introducing a queen that brings basically no value to the colony right now. The colony may accept her. You can put her in a cage and they may accept her. They might not give her a hard time, but she's not mated. She's not giving off the maximum amount of queen pheromone that she needs to give off for that colony to start doing the things that the colony does. So that's just one element of it. The other aspect to it is she has to then exit the queen cage, go out, get mated, and safely return, not getting eaten by anything or getting lost, and then begin to start being productive. I say just spend a couple extra dollars and get a mated queen, just have it done right from the beginning. Anyway, so off on that little bit of a tangent there. So you now have divided things up. You've introduced a queen of whatever source or method that you've decided that you want to do. And now you have 2 colonies. and they can continue on, and you're still in business. You've just doubled your footprint. You reduced the first colony's desire to swarm. You're definitely going to have an impact on your honey production for that year. But you're going to be able to work it out. You may have to supplemental feed at some point in time. There's a lot of variables involved between nectar flow and periods of dearth and how big the colony was to start with, what time of year that you did your split. A lot of moving parts, but just at a quick high level, that's an example of a 1-to-1. So we talked about 1-to-1, 1-to-many, many-to-1. So these are just different approaches to doing a split. Now on the queen side, we are going to do some more discussions about queen cell builders and other ways to manage queens. But for now, I just want to go ahead and we'll move on to talking about, some of the additional reasons. Like I said, we already talked about, making a split to reduce the tendency to swarm. And we just now covered methods of doing so to kind of expand your colony or your apiary, to make your apiary larger. So there's a couple of high level approaches there. But the other thing that a lot of people don't know about or don't even think about, which is actually my favorite thing in the whole world. Okay, let me go back. My favorite thing in the whole world as it relates to beekeeping productivity. Not the whole world, but the best thing that I think you can do is if you take a colony, and let's just say that your colony typically produces 50 pounds of honey that you're able to take every year. And in addition to that, they take enough honey for them to overwinter. So again, we're speaking very generically, but let's just say that colony produces 100 pounds of honey. 50 of it goes to you, 50 of it goes to them. They've overwintered on that. They still had some left over going into the next year. Your winter was a pretty average winter. So you feel very safe. As long as I get them 50 or more pounds of honey going into the winter, they're going to be fine, providing I've done everything else I need to do as a beekeeper. Now, take that exact same colony, and we just got done talking about what happens when you take resources away and the impact that those resources leaving has on your colony's ability to ramp up and to be productive and to gather all the great things they gather that ultimately get you to having honey. We talked about that part. What if we reverse that? What if instead of taking resources away, we start dumping resources into these hives? And I'm going to call this, from this point forward, I'm going to call this a production hive. We're trying to produce honey. So we know that if we take things away, we can make new colonies. What can we add to it? How can we add to it? This, to me, is the true beauty of nucleus colonies and what you can do with them. So we'll use the example that we used earlier, where we took several frames from a couple of hives. So we had 5 hives. We pulled one frame from each and we made a nuke. Now, what we're going to do using this approach that I like is, let's just say for the sake of argument that season we made our split and we have our one nuke, and then we've bought, since we have 5 existing colonies, we went ahead and bought 4 more nukes. So now we have 5 nukes and 5 production colonies. Well, a really cool idea to me, why don't we just put like 2 or 3 queens inside of every colony? I mean, think about that. You have 1 queen can produce X. So if I put 2 queens, we can lay twice as many eggs. We can do twice as much. What if we did 3 queens? Well, of course, all of you right now are probably screaming into your, whatever you're listening to this through, like, Jeff, you can't have more than 1 queen inside of a colony. That's ridiculous. Why would you even say that? With nucleus colonies and with these, what a lot of people refer to as resource colonies, you can do just that. And what I like to do with these nukes is, as we're ramping up in the spring, I'm adding honey supers that are empty. They're waiting to be filled with honey. And at the same time, I'm going to go to these nukes. I've got 5 nukes in this example. And every week, probably most likely, I'm going to be pulling I'm going to be pulling a frame of brood that has been capped and is about to emerge. I'm going to take that frame out, replace it with a piece of foundation. I may do foundation. I may do drawn comb. It just depends on what's going on. But I'm taking that out and I'm dropping that into my production hive. And now what's going to happen is, I think, what is the numbers? I think it's something like around 7,000 cells or something like that per frame. 7,500, something like that. And, with a good productive queen laying somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 eggs a day, I'm going to drop that frame in and all these bees are going to start emerging within a couple of days. The frame that is back there in that nucleus colony is a brand new, resource that's available to them to start laying eggs. That queen sees this new space and she's like, oh, awesome. I can go in here and I can lay a bunch of eggs. Again, it depends on if you already have drawn comb, it's even better. If you're taking it from that production colony as drawn comb, dropping it in there, and then she can start laying almost immediately, that to me is the best way to do it. But again, there's different reasons why you may want to go with foundation to get them to draw more comb. And that's an activity you can have your nucleus colonies handling while your production colonies are focusing on laying a lot of eggs, raising brood, and getting more honey, getting more nectar to make honey. Now what you're doing is you're using these 5 nucs in this example, and every week you're getting an extra several thousand bees coming into the hive. And all you really have to do with that nuc is just make sure they've got plenty of resources. And if it's a nectar flow, if it's the spring, they're getting everything they need from the environment. You don't have to supplemental feed them. You don't have to do anything. Now, if they are smaller nucs, you really got to pay close attention. If you're using like 2-frame nucs, just to make as little brood factories, you got to pay close attention to them, primarily because if you catch some bad weather and they get stuck inside for a few days or even a week, if it's a bad storm that comes through or something like that, it can be kind of disruptive and it makes it difficult for them if they don't have a lot of resources. But again, in the springtime, that's usually not a huge issue, just something for the back of your mind. But on the larger nucs, it's not an issue. They should have a frame at least of honey, plenty of open nectar to play with. And like I said, you can just be dropping a frame of brood into your production colonies every week. Now, you might do more. If you have more nucs, you might do 2, whatever you want to do. But you're going to take this production colony that has a limit. There's a hard limit to the number of eggs that queen can lay every day. And you're going to double or triple of that. You're going to have a massive, some of these colonies just get so huge. You'll be slapping honey supers on. And what you can start doing is, if you want to, you can go ahead and start pulling honey, and you can start harvesting honey earlier while you're leaving, new honey supers behind, or you can just stack them up and let them fill as they go. So that is, again, that's my favorite aspect of having nucleus colonies around to boost and support as resources to those production colonies. Okay, and thanks for staying with us here. So again, you can always feel free to reach out to Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. It's NEWBEES.com. Check us out on YouTube. It's just at Beekeeping for Newbies. And we've got the Discord room. You can link to that off the homepage as well. So feel free to check us out there. So now I want to talk about, now that you have these whether it's nucleus colonies or splits, let's just say for this specific example that, you want to make a few extra bucks. So you take those 5 colonies that you started with, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to do, maybe you'll use a couple of frames from each of those twice during that season. So maybe let's say you make a total of, let's just say 5 nucs. So you can make your nucs from the resources you have in your existing colonies. You've now reduced the tendency or the likelihood of them trying to swarm on you. And then you can, if you want, raise your own queens. You can wait until your colony is crowded and they make a queen cell, and then you can drop a frame with the queen cell into this new nuc of yours, have that queen go out, get mated. As long as she returns and is laying and everything is going well, you can sell that as a nuc with a mated queen. If you want to make it even easier on yourself and a little bit of a cleaner process, you can go ahead and just order or go pick up from a local reputable queen supplier. So let's say you're spending, let's say it's $30 a queen. So you make your 5 splits, you go and you spend $150 on queens, and you put 1 mated queen inside of each of those nucs, and you give her some time to get out. She starts laying, you verify that everything is working out, and now you sell each of your nucs for $200 a piece. So you got $1,000 minus the $150 that you spent for the queens, so that now you're at $850. Maybe $50 worth of hardware. So you profited $800 on your 5, on the 5 nucs that you just sold. So if you profited $800 and you bought the bees that you made these splits from, if these were all from packages, you pretty much just paid for your initial investment just with the nucs that you just sold. So that's kind of a cool option about, what you can do with those nucleus colonies. Another thing that you can do that they're really great for, it's great to be able to use them to supplement other colonies and to provide resources and things like that. But where it's also really, really helpful is sometimes things happen. Sometimes you're doing an inspection and you accidentally crush a queen. You're moving a frame around, you didn't see her, and she just happened to be up underneath of the bar and she gets squished. And it's so sad because it's so disruptive. A lot of times people don't know about it for a couple of weeks, sometimes 1 or 2 weeks. Here's what happens a lot. Somebody does an inspection and everything looks great. They crush the queen, they kill her. And they're planning to do an inspection in a week. And something happens and they just get tied up with work and it ends up being 10 days, maybe 12 days. And you really got to stay on top of this in the spring. I recommend at least, once a week in the spring. If you have to go to 10 days, that's fine, but it doesn't take long for a queen cell to get developed and for swarming activity to really ramp up in the spring. But let's just say this person was on the ball. They did their next inspection a week later. And they're looking around, and I always tell people, look, it's not easy to find queens early on. It takes a little bit of practice. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty, it's like once your brain is locked into what a queen looks like, it's weird. It's almost like a light switch going off. Once you figure it out, your brain knows, and it's a lot easier. But you're going to go in there, and your first 2, 5, 20, inspections, you might just have a hard time finding her. And that's okay. What I always tell people is you need to look for evidence that she's been there recently. So you want to be looking at frames that are most likely brood frames, which are going to be like, again, towards the middle, bottom, middle, and then up in the middle, that kind of thing. Starting at frames, I like to number frames from 1 to 10. So whichever direction you want to do it doesn't matter as long as you do it consistently. But if you're facing your colony, your hive, far left is frame 1, far right is frame 10. You're most likely, particularly for a newer hive, you're not going to see any eggs or queen activity on frames 1 and 2 and 9 and 10. She's going to start in the middle around 4 and 5 and 6 and then work her way out. So kind of start in that area, but you're going to be looking for eggs. If you don't see eggs, the other thing you want to be looking for is it looks like a tiny little worm in the shape of a C, and that's just a larva, and it'll be just a little shape of a C sitting at the bottom of the cell. If it's brand new, it'll just be, it'll be an egg that hatched into a larva and it'll just be that little C shape. And then after they recognize that it is now progressed from egg to larva, they'll put a little pool. It'll be kind of swimming in a pool of royal jelly. And you'll see that. You'll see it sitting there in that little pool of royal jelly. And as it gets larger, right before it gets capped, that little C-shaped larva will fill the entire cell. And then, within a couple of days of that, it gets capped and that's it. So seeing capped brood is great, but that only tells you that, like maybe a week or so ago, the queen was there, right? It doesn't tell you that she was there yesterday. So I'm looking for eggs and I want to see larvae. At a minimum, I've got to see something like that. If I don't see that, I'm getting nervous. So now you're a new beekeeper, you crush your queen, you come back a week later, you do your inspection, and it's still tough for you to even recognize what an egg and a larva is. And it's just, it's only your first or second inspection. Everything is still new. You maybe got stung once or twice and you're like, I'm going to close it back up. So everything looked kind of good. You enjoyed being a part of the process, but you didn't like getting stung and you're just kind of a little frustrated. And you're like, I'll come back again next week. So now you come back next week. Now you're 2 weeks after you crushed your queen and you're looking and there is some capped brood, but there's nothing new. And maybe you have a friend or a mentor, or maybe you messaged me and we talked about it. And I'm like, yeah, you got to figure out a new queen. So you're 2 weeks in now before you really have realized and accepted the fact that your queen is dead. So let's just say that best case scenario, 10 miles down the road, there's a beekeeper, there's an apiary, you can go get a queen. You drive there, you pick up the queen, you bring her back, put her in a queen, or she's in a queen cage. You put that queen cage into your hive and they're released. She's released in 3 days as a mated queen. So right around day 18, 19, you have a new queen. So you're basically 3 weeks, an entire worker brood cycle has been lost because of a mistake, right? And it happens. It's going to happen, right? It just, you can be really careful. I mean, I guess if you're the most careful person possible, yeah, you might be able to prevent it. But It's just one of those things that happens sometimes. And sometimes there are genetic defects. Sometimes a queen might look okay. She flies out, gets mated, comes back. Everything is going fine as it appears to us, but the colony detects that something's wrong with her. So they may try to supersede her, which is kind of a separate discussion, but they basically make another cell that is similar to a swarm cell, but it's a cell designed to create a new queen so they can replace her. But this comes back to another beauty of what that split that you made, which is now a nucleus colony, what you can do with it. Because what you can do here is you've lost your queen. You've accepted, here you are at week 2, you've accepted your queen is gone. You go, now this colony that you've been working with, they are what we refer to as hopelessly queenless. There's no queen there. There's no queen cells there. There are no eggs or larvae that they could then convert into and make a queen cell from. They are hopelessly queenless. A hopelessly queenless colony is dying for a bee. They're dying for a queen bee specifically. You can take that nucleus colony, let's say it's a 5-frame nuke. You can go in with all the brood and everything, you can move the whole thing into the new colony if you want to. You can take the frame that has the queen on it and drop it into the new colony. Whatever you want to do, you can get that queen from this nuke into this production colony, and they will just openly accept her. They are going to be so thrilled to have a laying queen back in their hive, emitting that queen pheromone and letting them know that everything's going to be okay and for them to get back to work. So that is a great, great use for having nucleus colonies or splits that you've done that are now nukes, or even if they're full hives. Even if you did a split and it has become a full hive, it's still a spare queen that you didn't have at the beginning of that year. So you can move that queen in to replace that failed or that queen that's no longer working well. Similar to that, or the one that you killed, but similar to that, you can have scenarios where you missed a swarm. So let's say, for example, you did all those splits that we talked about earlier. You have your 5 nukes, but daggone it, it's springtime and things got a little wild and the colony swarmed on you. In my opinion, do not wait for a queen cell to have a new virgin queen emerge, for her to wait a few days or a week to go get mated, to go out and successfully, hopefully, get mated, return, and then start laying. Absolutely not. You recognize they have swarmed, they are gone, the population is about half of what it used to be. You can here's my recommendation, take a frame that has a queen cell on it, move that over to your nuke. Now take that nuke that you made that has a viable queen in there, take the frame that has the queen on it, stick that back into that production colony. Now what happens is they're back in business right away. They are back in business and they're up and running with very little disruption. Now the nucleus colony has a queen cell. Now you can let that queen cell, that queen can then emerge from the queen cell. She can go out and get mated and come back and start working that queen cell. And again, we're not interrupting everything that's going on in our production colony. Another great example of how you would use a nuke. Another example that I want to give you is to make a cell builder or to convert them into a cell builder. So we talked before about what you would do if you wanted to make your nukes kind of to begin with. And we talked about the scenario where you would go to a local reputable supplier and you would buy queens that you would then introduce into the colonies. And you had to spend, in that example, $30 per queen for those mated queens. Well, what if we made a cell builder? So what a cell builder is we talked before briefly here about a hopelessly queenless colony. You're going to make one. You're going to take, in this case, we'll use a deep as an example. You're going to take a deep box. You're going to fill it up with, the way that I would do it would be 8 frames of brood. No open brood. So we don't want any larvae or eggs or anything like that. It's strictly just capped brood. And we're going to drop all those frames of capped brood in there. We're going to take other frames that have nurse bees on. So nurse bees are going to hang out with open and capped brood. They're going to be in that area pretty much all the time. So the bees that are close to the brood are going to be nurse bees. We're going to take other frames of nurse bees and we're going to shake them into this cell builder. So now you have a whole bunch of bees, probably 8 or 10 frames worth of bees that we're going to shake in. And again, it doesn't have to be. It could be 4 or 5. If you only have 3, then use the 3 you have, right? Don't get held, locked in on it must be 8 or 10 or whatever. Use what you have and make it work. The more bees you have in there, the more nurse bees that you have in that cell builder, the better quality queen cells that you're going to make. But again, if you're only going to make 8 or 10 of them, you won't need as many resources as you would if you were making 30. Like, for example, I've done some before where you have about 25 or 30 in a frame, and you're running 2 cell builder frames 1 week apart. So the first one goes in, and then a week later, that one gets moved and another one goes in its place. And then you're just kind of cycling them out, constantly adding new workers to those cell builders, new nurse bees to those cell builders, and you're repeating this over and over again. And you can make hundreds of queen cells every month. As a new beekeeper, small-time operation, building a cell builder isn't really the most practical thing if you're just trying to make 4 or 5. If you wanted 4 or 5 queen cells, I would probably just take a regular nuke, make it queenless with a whole bunch of open brood, and let them make queen cells on that you can then subsequently split apart, put into other colonies, and then let them emerge and go get mated and all of that. That's a whole kind of separate way of doing things. But these cell builders, once you've loaded them up with a whole bunch of nurse bees and brood that's about to emerge, so now you're going to have even more nurse bees, one of those open slots in that 10-frame configuration, one of them I'm going to put a feeder in there. And let me go back. I wouldn't make every one of these frames completely nothing but brood. You want to make sure that you have brood, but you also want to make sure you have some resources. You want some nectar, you want some pollen, because they need nectar, pollen, and nurse bees. They need those 3 things, have to be present to make good quality queens. So what I usually just put a frame feeder. If it's like a 1.5 frame feeder, then obviously I'm going to have to give up 2 slots for that. But I put the frame feeder in that way. If I get a 3-day rainstorm come in, my cell builder is still working. They're not absent or void of any resources they might need. So you have, basically in that case, let's say we have 2 frame slots kind of reserved for the feeder. One is for the actual grafted cells that you've done, where you've grafted individual young larvae into, whatever type of approach that you like to use for how you make your queen cells. And then you'll put those in another slot. So basically you're giving up 3 slots. So let's say that you had, as an example, 10 frame deep, 2 slots are going for the feeder, 1 for the actual grafted queen cells, and maybe you have just a frame of honey, and maybe like a pollen frame, and then the rest is all just brood getting ready to emerge. So this is a great way to make a cell builder from your nucleus colonies while not impacting your production colonies. So let's say that it's the spring, like we talked about before, and then in week 1 of these nukes really being fully ramped up, you pull 1 frame from each of them and put that into your production colonies. And then in week 2, I pull 1 frame again, and I make, let's say, a nuke, a small, like a 5 or 6 frame nuke, or single deep, however you want to do it. Again, you got to figure out what's going to work best for you given your situation. But you're going to make a small cell builder. You'll pull 5 frames of capped brood from, I can't get this out for some reason, from each of your nukes, one from each nuke, to make this new 5-frame nuke basically. And you'll put in your graft. So now you've boosted that colony, on week 1. Week 2, you can use those resources to make the cell builder that we just discussed. So you'll take a single frame from each of them to contribute to being your cell builder. Or you may say, hey, I'm going to take 1 frame from each nuke, and maybe I'll use this other, hive number 5. They're not as productive anyway. I'll take several frames from that to support the cell builder. So you run the cell builder for, let's say, just 2 weeks. You get it up and running. You drop your grafted queen cells in. You just keep an eye on them. You go in at the end of, let's say, 5-6 days. You pull it out. You see nice queen cells in there. You come back again in a few more days. So probably by like day 12, you're going to go look at it. Everything looks good. All the queen cells are made. They're all capped. You're a few days away from those queens emerging. Now you can take all the resources you have left and put those into nukes. So you have your 5 original nukes that during the course of this 12 days, they're starting to replace everything you've taken. You can now go ahead and set up, let's say 3 other nukes. Take all the resources from the cell builder, put it into those nukes, drop queen cells in those so you can make new ones. And then now you can go ahead and sell the queen cells, put the queen cells in something else, make more splits off of another colony, take your nukes that are now 12, 13 days later and have an extra frame. You pull one frame from each of them into 2-frame nukes. And now you're putting, there's so many different things you can do. You're really only limited by your imagination and the resources the bees have. Everything we've talked about today is assuming in my area that you're in like that March, April, May timeframe. You've got a big nectar flow and everything is going great. All of this changes when there are significant changes to the nectar flow. Everything I've been talking about today does not work in a dearth. Everything I'm talking about doesn't work where I am in October. If you're up north, that's probably more like September, right? Those things don't work at that time of year. If you're not treating for varroa, right, you're going to have problems because all of these bees are moving back and forth between multiple colonies. So if you're like, well, I'm going to treat my production colonies, but I'm not going to worry about my nukes. Great. Your nukes are going to be varroa bombs, and you're going to drop those resources into your production colonies, and what's going to happen there, right? So there's a lot of moving parts with this, a lot of things to consider. Another thing that you can do, in addition to the things we talked about most recently here, the cell builders, but another thing you can do is you can use, let's say, for example, that you are finding some genetics that aren't exactly the best. Like you have those 5 colonies. 4 of them are doing exceptionally well. Everything is going great and you're really happy. And one of them is just not. They are just not figuring it out. Well, you can go ahead and take one of your nukes that is just cranking out frames. They're a brood factory. They're just cranking out frames of brood. Just take the queen from there, move her over to the other one. And through any method that we discussed, you can replace that queen cell in that nuke. Or maybe you decommission that nuke altogether. Maybe you go to that number 5 not productive colony, take the entire nuke and put it into that colony, kill off that queen, the original queen, kill her first, get rid of her, make them completely, hopelessly queenless, and then drop that new queen in there. And now you've got better genetics. Another thing you can do is if you like to catch swarms, I'm a big fan of it myself. Sometimes swarms are a little kooky, right? I've had swarms before that are massive. I mean, I have seen, caught, and been around swarms that were bigger than most of my production colonies. Like, I don't even know how that many bees swarmed at one time. It could have been very well been a colony that absconded, where like the entire colony left at once, which is quite possible. But I have seen some very massive swarms. I've also seen some very small swarms. I've seen some that are, probably the size of a football. They're just really not that big. Maybe even smaller than the football. Maybe like, I don't know, just definitely smaller than they should be. And what you can do with these nukes or these splits that you made earlier in the season is you can use them, or, vice versa. You can use them to boost a captured swarm, or you can take the resources from that swarm to boost something else. I kind of prefer to do it the other way around. I prefer to take that swarm, isolate them a little bit if I can, just to kind of get a handle on the genetics, how they behave, how their temperament is, and just to kind of get a feel for the colony themselves before I start introducing anything they might have. I want to go ahead and get them on a varroa regimen, get them treated a couple times and all of that. But taking resources from the nukes to boost up that captured swarm is it's a great way to use that brood factory. It's a great way to use those nukes and to help get that swarm kind of kicked off. Now, again, swarming typically takes place at times of year when you have a big nectar flow. Now, while we're on this, I'm going to go a quick sidebar. A lot of people think, well, it's fall. I can't have a swarm in the fall. When a colony is in its operational colony mode, right? Workers are born and they go out and they start doing things. They're picking up on pheromones. The pheromones that they are picking up on that are being released and disseminated throughout the hive are telling them the status and health of the colony. So they know what resources are abundant, what resources are not there, what's needed, and they're communicating with each other to figure out, what they have to have, what they don't have, what the deficiencies are. If there is a fall flow, those nurse bees that have just been born, that are trying to manage brood and everything, they don't know if it's March or if it's September. Like, they have no idea. So If you give them a ton of resources and you have a big fall flow, or like a lot of people do, like I'm going to feed my bees like crazy all through September and October to make sure they make it through the winter, you are creating an artificial swarm, or at least artificial swarm conditions, I should say. You are feeding them and you're creating an artificial flow, and you're making them think, oh, wow, things are really ramping up. It must be springtime. Maybe we should swarm. So if you are feeding, or there is a really, really large fall flow and they don't have a lot of space within, the colony to put away those fall resources, they could potentially swarm in the fall. So don't be fooled. The bees don't know. March, September, they don't know, right? They'll figure it out. They'll figure it out eventually, but they just don't know, exactly. You want to be mindful of that when you're feeding, but also keeping in mind just, the fact that swarming is not limited to just the spring. So now we get to, what do you do with all your splits at the end of the year? What do you do with your resource colonies, or these nucs in the example? So we have 5 production colonies. We have 5 nucs. What do we do at the end of the year? So as you've heard me say many times before, if you ask 10 beekeepers, you're going to get 10 different answers. So I'll tell you what I do, and you can do what's best for you. If the environment will allow for it, sometimes you can just overwinter the nuc as it is. If the temperatures are right and they're, and again, this is a whole balancing act of, getting the bees into different states. If you can get the bees into a state where it's cool out and they just settle in and they kind of get in that little Zen state and they just kind of gel there and they just, they're just nice and cool and relaxed and they can eat the resources they need and then come out in the spring and everything is happy. That's great. They can really maximize the efficiency of the colony over winter. A lot of times, some of your, middle of the country and southern U.S. specifically, colonies can have this kind of limbo where it's really cold and then it's really nice, and it's really cold and it's really nice, and it's back and forth, back and forth. So they're using a lot of resources, and a lot of these bees that need to be winter bees that need to live all winter long, and they live longer by being less active. Well, the more active that they are on a lot of warm days in the wintertime, the lower their life expectancy. They're going to die faster. So when you get into January, February, March, sometimes it is not unusual to lose colonies at that time of year because of so much activity over the winter on those warmer days. So it's really tough. But if your environment will support it, you can overwinter a nuc. If I do it, I like to double stack them. So I would take like 2 of these nucs, combine them together, and some people will just combine them together and let the queens fight it out. I don't do that. I will dispatch a queen and not have them fighting. I don't like to do that. That's just my preference. Lots of beekeepers do it and don't mind. You got to figure out what's best for you. My theory behind it is always that I've chosen one that I like better for whatever reason, and I don't risk her being injured in a fight with another queen over who's going to take over. So one queen dies, one's injured, and now they're like, oh, she's injured, we need to supersede her, and you get into a whole other issue. So definitely knowing your area and whether or not it will support an overwintered nuc, that's something that you have to kind of consider and understand. I mentioned how I like to combine them, combining 2 or 3 or whatever. If you want to do that, you can do that. You could take all 5 of them, put them into one big colony, save your favorite queen, dispatch the rest, and let them overwinter. So you can kind of do whatever works best for you on that. I also like that divided deep approach where you take like a 10 frame deep, you put a dividing wall in the middle, 4 frames on the left, 4 frames on the right, and then you're going to stack 4 frame nucs on top of that, and then 2 more 4 frame nucs on top of that, and then you can put a queen excluder on there, and then you can put honey supers on top of that, and now you have a colony on the left, a colony on the right. One entrance is on one side of the hive. The other entrance is now on the back of the hive, so they're entering through different areas. And over winter, they will form one big cluster on that middle wall, and they can share each other's heat. So that's another great way of overwintering them. So in that case, with the 5, you may take one of them, split the resources up between the others, and you take 2 colonies go in one side, 2 colonies go in the other, and you're overwintering this, 2 of these double divided deeps. One thing I wanted to kind of point out to you all as well is a lot of times, the spring is going to roll around, and I've kind of noticed this funny things this funny thing that a lot of places will sell, and they refer to them as overwintered nucs, and they sell them at a premium. So let's say, as an example, maybe you can buy a 5-frame nuke for $200. But if you want the overwintered nuke, well, that's $250. And, to me, it's pretty intuitive because I know what that's supposed to represent. What that's supposed to be is I have a queen, and that queen has successfully overwintered, and I am putting her into a nucleus colony. That means to me. That is what that means to me. And the only variance to that would be that she was in a nuke and the entire nuke with that queen overwintered by themselves. I don't care. I don't care if she overwintered in a larger colony. I don't care if she overwintered in that nuke. My expectation is that I am getting a queen that has already overwintered. What you really got to pay attention to, and this is what comes back to making sure that you're doing business with reputable suppliers, is I think there are some people out there who are basically taking bees that have overwintered, and because it's not really lying, if those bees overwinter and then you set up a cell builder in the spring and you mate a queen and you drop a newly mated queen into this nuke that technically is full of bees that overwintered, they're not lying. So what I would tell you is that to make sure you are asking them, so you need to specifically say, when you all are selling your overwintered nukes, is that an overwintered queen inside of a nuke? Or are you taking overwintered bees and adding a new queen? Because I don't care if you have honeybees by themselves that overwinter. That's great. I want the queen that they came from. That's the more important part. That's the genetics that you need. And that also kind of leads back to, another point where as you get better, as you get into years 2, 3, 4, and you become a better beekeeper, you're going to recognize like, hey, my bees are overwintering. I'm only losing 1 out of 5 every year. Or maybe you're going to have years where you're going to think you're I got to censor myself because I know there's kids that listen to this. What's the right word? You're amazing. Okay, let's go with that. You're going to be thinking like, wow, I'm the best beekeeper in the world because I didn't lose any hives this year. It's going to happen. And you're going to be really excited because you know that you're doing the right thing. Why not capitalize on that? Make sure that you are starting to rear your own queens, even if you're doing it at a very small capacity, even if you're just doing it, 1 or 2 here and there. Make your own queens because you have the formula for queens that can overwinter where you are. It's great that we have availability of queens. I can go right now, not now, but I can go in March, April, May, order a queen from Alabama or Georgia or wherever, and I can have it here in 2 days, overnight, and it's going to cost me an arm and a leg to get it here, but I can get that, and that's really cool. I want bees that can overwinter at my house. I want bees that know my area and can survive here, and that's the benefit that you get by raising your own. So that's something we can talk about later on and get into some more details on that one. But I would put that kind of in the back of your mind as a goal of where you need to be trying to get to become a self-sustaining beekeeper. I don't want you to have to depend on anybody else. I would put this into all aspects of life. I want you to be self-sufficient in everything you do, but that's a separate discussion for another podcast. Okay, so this is going to lead me to another point here. So I've actually got one quick follow-on to what I just mentioned about you doing, making your own bees. There's kind of a quick and easy way to do this. Bees, I saw this trick years ago, and it's just taking a frame of, regular foundation. And if you kind of envision this in your mind, like you're looking at a frame, you've got, your left hand, right hand, you're holding it in front of you. Imagine cutting from the left down at an angle kind of towards, divide it up into quarters basically. And you're going to make V's. You're going to cut about 1/3 the way down into the foundation, the wax foundation. And you're going to cut like a jigsaw almost. You're going to make these V's up and down and make probably about 4 of them, 4 or 5 of them across the entire bottom. So you should have like 4 or 5 points now at the bottom of that foundation. Now, again, this should be foundation of already drawn comb. What's really cool with this is once that foundation is drawn out and it is now comb and you've cut these V's into the bottom of it, it makes it really, really easy for the nurse bees to raise queen cells. So when you're ready to start making your own queens and you want that queen to lay those up, you just drop that frame right in the middle of the brood box, right in the middle of your brood chamber, and let her lay that thing up. And then you can put that into a queen cell, like a cell builder, or into a queenless colony. and they would load those edges up with queen cells that are really easy to cut off. So you don't have to go through a lot of elaborate grafting and a lot of other things. You can easily get 10 queen cells off using that technique. If this doesn't make sense to you, let me know. Like, get on the Discord, send me a message on Discord, post it anywhere. I don't care where it is in the Discord room. Send me an email, jeff@beekeepingfornewbies.com. It's NEWBEES.com. And if this doesn't make sense, I will add it to my number one priority of my video list of what I need to make a video on, because this is one of the coolest things out there. It is super easy to do, and it works very, very well if you're not comfortable grafting, or you don't want to graft, or you're like me and you can't see anything anymore because you're over 50. I get it. All right, everybody. So I'm going to wrap everything up today. And DJ, I hope I answered all your questions, brother. I hope I covered everything on here, but I know you're going to give me a hard time and beat me up in the Discord room if I didn't, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. Everybody, please take care of yourselves. And I don't know if I'm going to have another episode that comes out before Thanksgiving or not. So please have a happy Thanksgiving. Take care of yourselves. Be well, be kind to one another. And remember that I love you and there's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.